Well, hello, boys and girls. It has been so long since I've seen you. So wonderful. Glad to be back. I was on some important business, being a judge and all. So Justice Strauss is here again, darlings. Isn't that wonderful? Well, I'm going to introduce the next two chapters to you of The Bad Beginning, the series of unfortunate events. And, of course, Count Olaf, he's going to make me a star. Isn't that wonderful? I'm going to be in his play, The Marvelous Marriage. I am so excited to be able to do this. Now, I know that Mallory and Klaus and Sonny have been having a little bit of trouble with Count Olaf, but how can he be so bad if he wants me to be in his play and to start becoming famous as an actress? Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. I always wanted to do this. I cannot wait. Now, there are some words that you need to know before we start the next two chapters. And we're getting into chapter 11 and 12, so we're getting near the end of the book. And we're probably only going to do half of chapter 12 because 11 and 12 are pretty long. And then 13 is the final chapter, and we'll find out what happens. I don't believe Count Olaf is as horrid as the children are saying. We shall see, we shall see. The first word that you may want to know is scurried. If you scurried, you moved very quickly up or down or away from something. Hoisted is another word that you'll hear, and that just means to lift something or to pick something up. Grappling hook, that is a device that people use to climb things, especially mountain climbers. It's something that sticks right into the stone tightly so they do not fall as they're climbing up with the rope connected to it. Fetch. Fetch is a lovely word, isn't it? Especially if you have a dog. Well, in this one, it has to do with a person. And if you go fetch something, it just means you go and get it and come back with it. Confront. Confront is a word where you go and talk to someone or go and do something that is uncomfortable. Like you're going to talk to someone and tell them that you don't like something they did, or that you know of that evil plan to steal all your money, things like that. Catastrophe. Those are just really disastrous things that might happen to someone, things that change your life and are upsetting. And kerosene. Kerosene is a word that is an oil, and it's used as a fuel. It's also used to burn lanterns and keep a flame going. So you're going to hear all of those in this story. I believe that is it. Yes, it is. I covered everything. Now, let's see what happens with the marvelous marriage, and let's see what Violet and Sonny are going to do now, and Klaus. Because Klaus, he's very intelligent, but I don't think Count Olaf and his friends believe so. Will they get help? Or is the marvelous marriage just a play, as I say it is, and Count Olaf and all of his friends say it is as well? So let's find out in the next two chapters, chapter 11 and half of chapter 12. Okay, my darlings, please cheer for me when I get on the stage and start acting. All right, I'll see you in a little bit. Ciao. Chapter 11. How pleasant that you could join us, the hook-handed man said in a sickly sweet voice. Violet immediately tried to scurry back down the rope, but Count Olaf's assistant was too quick for her. In one movement, he hoisted her into the tower room and, with a flick of his hook, sent her rescue device clanging to the ground. Now Violet was as trapped as her sister. I'm so glad you're here, the hook-handed man said. I was just thinking how much I wanted to see your pretty face. Have a seat. What are you going to do with me? Violet asked. I said have a seat, the hook-handed man snarled and pushed her into a chair. Violet looked around the dim and messy room. I am certain that over the course of your own life, you have noticed that people's rooms reflect their personalities. In my room, for instance, I have gathered a collection of objects that are important to me, including a dusty accordion on which I can play a few sad songs, a large bundle of notes on the activities of the Baudelaire Orphans, and a blurry photograph, taken a very long time ago, of a woman whose name is Beatrice. These are items that are very precious to me and dear to me. The tower room held objects that were very dear and precious to Count Olaf, and they were terrible things. There were scraps of paper on which he had written his evil ideas in an illegible scrawl, lying in messy piles on top of the copy of nuptial law he had taken away from Klaus. There were a few chairs and a handful of candles which were giving off flickering shadows. Littered all over the floor were empty wine bottles and dirty dishes. But most of all were the drawings and paintings and carvings of eyes, big and small, all over the room. There were eyes painted on the ceilings and scratched into the grimy wooden floors. There were eyes scrawled along the windowsill, and one big eye painted on the knob of the door that led to the stairs. It was a terrible place. The hook-handed man reached into a pocket of his greasy overcoat and pulled out a walkie-talkie. With some difficulty, he pressed a button and waited a moment. "Boss, it's me," he said. "Your blushing bride just climbed up here to try and rescue the biting brat." He paused as Count Olaf said something. "I don't know, with some sort of rope." It was a grappling hook," Violet said, and tore off a sleeve of a nightgown to make a bandage for her shoulder. "I made it myself." "She says it was a grappling hook," the hook-handed man said into the walkie-talkie. "I don't know, boss. Yes, boss. Yes, boss. Of course I understand. She's yours. Yes, boss." He pressed a button to disconnect the line and then turned to face Violet. "Count Olaf is very displeased with his bride." "Not his bride," Violet said bitterly. "Well, very soon you will be," the hook-handed man said, wagging his hook the way most people would wag a finger. "In the meantime, however, I have to go and fetch your brother. The three of you will be locked in the room here until night falls. That way Count Olaf can be sure you will all stay out of mischief." With that, the hook-handed man stomped out of the room. Violet heard the door lock behind him, and then listened to his footsteps fading away down the stairs. She immediately went over to Sonny and put a hand on her little head, afraid to untie or untape her sister for fear of incurring a word which here means bringing about Count Olaf's wrath. Violet stroked Sonny's hair and murmured that everything was all right. But of course, everything was not all right. Everything was all wrong. As the first light of morning trickled into the tower room, Violet reflected on all the awful things she and her siblings had experienced recently. Their parents had died suddenly and horribly. Mrs. Poe had bought them ugly clothing. They had moved into Count Olaf's house and were treated terribly. Mr. Poe had refused to help them. They had discovered a fiendish plot involving marrying Violet and stealing the Baudelaire fortune. Klaus had tried to confront Olaf with knowledge he'd learned in Justice Strauss's library and failed, and poor Sonny had been captured. And now Violet had tried to rescue Sonny and found herself captured as well. All in all, the Baudelaire Orphans had encountered catastrophe after catastrophe, and Violet found their situation lamentably deplorable, a phrase which here means it was not at all enjoyable. The sound of footsteps coming up the stairs brought Violet out of her thoughts, and soon the hook-handed man opened the door and thrust a very tired, confused, and scared Klaus into the room. "Here's the last orphan," the hook-handed man said. "And now I must go and help Count Olaf with final preparations for tonight's performance. No monkey business, you two, or I'll have to tie you up and let you dangle out the window as well." Glaring at them, he locked the door again and tromped downstairs. Klaus blinked and looked around the filthy room. He was still in his pajamas. What has happened?" he asked Violet. "Why are we up here?" "I tried to rescue Sonny," Violet said, using an invention of mine to climb up the tower. Klaus went over to the window and looked down at the ground. "It's so high up," he said. "You must have been terrified." "It was very scary," she admitted, but not as scary as the thought of marrying Count Olaf. "Sorry your invention didn't work," Klaus said sadly. "Well, the invention worked fine," Violet said, rubbing her sore shoulder. "I just got caught, and now we're doomed. The hook-handed man said he'd keep us here until tonight, and then it's the marvelous marriage." "Do you think you could invent something else that would help us escape?" Klaus asked, looking around the room. "Maybe," Violet said. "And why don't you go through those books and papers? Perhaps there's some information that could be of use." For the next few hours, Violet and Klaus searched the room in their own minds for anything that might help them. Violet looked for objects with which she could invent something. Klaus read through Count Olaf's papers and books. From time to time, they would go over to Sunny and smile at her and pat her head to reassure her. Occasionally, Violet and Klaus would speak to each other, but mostly they were silent, lost in their own thoughts. "If we had any kerosene," Violet said around noon, "I could make Molotov cocktails with these bottles." "What are Molotov cocktails?" Klaus asked. "Oh, they're small bombs made inside bottles," Violet explained. "We could throw them out the window and attract the attention of the passersby." "But we don't have any kerosene," Klaus said mournfully. They were silent for several hours. "Well, if we were polygamous," Klaus said, "Count Olaf's marriage plan wouldn't work." "Well, what are polygamists?" Violet asked. "Polygamists are people who marry more than one person," Klaus explained. "In this community, polygamists are breaking the law even if they have married in the presence of a judge, with the statement of I do and the signed document in their own hand. I read it in here, nuptial law." "But we're not polygamists," Violet said mournfully. They were silent for several more hours. "We could break these bottles in half," Violet said, "and use them as knives, but I'm afraid that Count Olaf's troop would overpower us." "You could say I don't instead of I do," Klaus said, "but I'm afraid Count Olaf would order Sunny dropped off the tower." "Certainly would," Count Olaf said, and the children jumped. They had been so involved in their conversation that they hadn't heard him come up the stairs and open the door. He was wearing a fancy suit, and his eyebrow had been waxed so it looked shiny as his eyes. Behind him stood the hook-handed man, who smiled and waved a hook at the youngsters. "Come, Orphans," Count Olaf said. "It's time for the big event. My associate here will stay behind in this room, and we will keep in constant contact through our walkie-talkies. If anything goes wrong during tonight's performance, your sister will be dropped to her death. Come along now." Violet and Klaus looked at each other, and then at Sunny, still dangling in her cage, and followed Count Olaf at the door. As Klaus walked down to the tower stairs, he felt a heavy sinking in his heart as all hope left him. There truly seemed to be no way out of their predicament. Violet was feeling the same way until she reached out with her right hand to grasp the banister for balance. She looked at her right hand for a second and began to think. All the way down the stairs and out the door and the short walk down the block to the theatre, Violet thought and thought and thought, harder than she had ever had in her entire life. Chapter 12. As Violet and Klaus Baudelaire stood, still in their nightgown and pyjamas, backstage at Count Olaf's theatre, they were of two minds, a phrase which here means they felt two different ways at the same time. On one hand, they were of course filled with dread. From the murmur of voices they heard on the stage, the two Baudelaire orphans could tell that the performance of the marvelous marriage had begun, and it seemed too late to do anything to foil Count Olaf's plan. On the other hand, however, they were fascinated, as they had never been backstage at the theatrical production, and there was so much to see. Members of Count Olaf's theatre troupe hurried this way and that, too busy to even glance at the children. 3 very short men were carrying a large flat piece of wood, painted to look like a living room. The 2 white-faced women, were arranging flowers in a vase that from far away appeared to be marble, but up close looked more like cardboard. An important-looking man with warts all over his face was adjusting enormous light fixtures. As the children peeked on stage, they could see Count Olaf in his fancy suit declaiming some lines from the play just as the curtain came down, controlled by a woman with very short hair who was pulling on a long rope attached to a pulley. Despite their fear, you see, the two older Baudelaires were very interested in what was going on and only wished that they were not involved in any way. As the curtain fell, Count Olaf strode off stage and looked at the children. "It's the end of Act 2. Why aren't the orphans in their costumes?" he hissed to the two white-faced women. Then, as the audience broke into applause, his angry expression turned to one of joy, and he walked back on stage. Gesturing to the short-haired woman to raise the curtain, he strode to the exact center of the stage and took elaborate bows as the curtain came up. He waved and blew kisses to the audience as the curtain came down again, and then his face once again filled with anger. "Intermission is only 10 minutes, he said, "and then the children must perform. Get them into their costumes quickly." Without a word, the two white-faced women grabbed Violet and Klaus by the wrists and led them into a dressing room. The room was dusty but shiny, covered in mirrors and tiny lights so the actors could see better to put on their makeup and wigs, and there were people calling out to one another and laughing as they changed their clothes. One white-faced woman yanked Violet's arms up and pulled her nightgown off over her head and thrust a dirty, lacy white dress at her to put on. Klaus, meanwhile, had his pajamas removed by the other white-faced woman and was hurriedly stuffed into a blue sailor suit that itched and made him look like a toddler. "Isn't this exciting?" said a voice, and the children turned to see me, Justice Strauss, all dressed up in her judge's robes and powdered wig. She was clutching a small book. "Well, you children look wonderful." So do you," Klaus said. "What's that book?" "Why, those are my lines," Justice Strauss said. "Count Olaf told me to bring a law book and read the real wedding ceremony in order to make the play as realistic as possible. All you have to say, Violet, is, 'I do,' but I have to make quite a speech. This is going to be so much fun." "You know what would be fun," Violet said carefully, "is if you changed your lines around just a little." Klaus's face lit up. "Yes, Justice Strauss, be creative. There's no reason to stick to the legal ceremony. It's not as if it's a real wedding." Justice Strauss frowned. "I don't know about that, children," she said. "I think it would be best to follow Count Olaf's instructions. After all, he's in charge." "Justice Strauss," a voice called. "Justice Strauss, please report to the makeup artist." "Oh my word, I get to wear makeup." Justice Strauss had on a dreamy expression as if she were about to be crowned queen, instead of just having some powders and cream smeared on her face. "Children, I must go. See you on stage, my dears." Justice Strauss ran off, leaving the children to finish changing into their costumes. One of the white-faced women put a flowered headdress on Violet, who realized in horror that the dress she had changed into was a bridal gown. The other woman put a sailor cap on Klaus, who gazed in one of the mirrors, astonished at how ugly he looked. His eyes met those of Violet, who was looking in the mirror as well. "What can we do?" Klaus said quietly. "Pretend to be sick. Maybe they'd call off the performance." "Count Olaf would know what we were up to," Violet replied glumly. "Act 3 of The Marvelous Marriage by Alfred Good is about to begin!" A man with a clipboard shouted, "Everyone please get into your places for Act 3! The actors rushed out of the room, and the white-faced women grabbed the children and hustled them out after them. The backstage area was in one complete pandemonium, a word here which means actors and stagehands running around attending to last-minute details. The bald man with the long nose hurried by the children, then stopped himself, looked at Violet in her wedding dress and smirked. Oh my goodness, my dears, how could I have been such a fool to believe that Count Olaf was not a wicked, evil man? I cannot believe what he is doing to these poor Baudelaire orphans. I guess Justice Strauss's memory is just not so good anymore. Oh my. So, let's see what all has happened in this chapter. Oh my goodness. Now, poor Violet, what has happened to her? And Klaus, has he come up with any plans to help his sisters? Poor little Sonny is like a monkey in a cage. Oh my gosh. And how are they going to get out of this wicked situation? What is Count Olaf doing to make them go along with his plan? What is he doing to them? And how is he getting them to do this? But is there something that Violet may have come up with that could help her? I can't believe what a fool I was to believe that this was just a play and to go along with going to read this ceremony as an actual marriage ceremony. Oh my. So hopefully we will see if Violet can figure out what to do. And Klaus, does he have a plan yet? Sonny, I think she's trapped. I don't know if there's anything else that's going to happen that can help her. And I was so starstruck that I didn't even realize what was going on. And Mr. Poe, no clue. No clue. So next week, in the end of chapter 12, and then the final chapter, chapter 13, we will find out what happens to the poor Baudelaire orphans, and if Count Olaf, if he does marry poor little Violet, and if he gets their money, and what is he going to do to Klaus and Sonny if he does? He's mentioned many times what he will do to them. What a wicked, horrible, despicable man. Until next week, dears, and hopefully the Baudelaire orphans can forgive me for my silliness in all of this. All right, my dears, please have a good evening, and please be aware of wicked, evil people like this. I will see you next week.